Hi there, I'm here for another look at the latest in the Joann liquidation. They say 30 to 70% off, so let's check this out. So right away, they have that sign where they have the breakdown again, and they say 90% on something, so that'll be interesting to see. And then one of the things that I saw that I didn't see before was this fixtures, furniture, and equipment for sale, and a board that has all of these different things that people can come in and they can pick out and get their names put down on it. And then over here is an example of what I think it could be stuff from the warehouse that was meant for Halloween, but I've also been hearing about things that have been coming from potentially previous liquidations that they're dumping into the store now. And then over here is the holiday fabrics, and so those are still 50% off. They're getting pretty depleted. And then one of the big things that happened last week was the keepsake calico. That's the quilting cotton. It went on to 30% sale. It had been holding at 20% for quite a while, so it's nice that it's doing that. And if you look at my previous video, I show how I save money to where I make it actually more than 50% off when I do it. So be sure to check that out. I'm going to link that at the end. And then the fat quarters here, I didn't try to buy one. On the website, they're saying that they're 20% off, but I know that other pre-cuts in the store were 30% off. And here's some fleece blanket kits. They have these scattered in a couple of different locations around the store. And then we have the Woobles yarn. And then next to it is these candy melts. I hadn't seen them before until a few weeks ago, and those are scattered around the store as well. And then if you look over to the right, there's these outdoor rugs, and that seems to also be something that is coming from potentially some other liquidation that this company managed in the past. And then over here is novelty cotton. That is also 30% off. And then the team fabric, so that would be the professional teams and the college teams, that is 50% off. And then these pre-cuts, that's 30% off, so that's a fat quarter bundle that I'm holding right there. And then the solids finally increased the discount, so that's 30% off. I managed to score myself a nice Kona that had just slightly more than a yard on it, so I actually got more of about 60% off when I did that, and that was pretty nice. And then these publications, those are only 50% off. I think they've been holding that for a few weeks now, so that's not really an exciting change. The pre-quilted fabrics, those are 30% off. I can't really remember if that's any change or if that's increased at all. And then the Halloween pre-cuts, those are 50% off, so that's Halloween and Christmas. And then over here is the premium quilting cotton, that is 30% off. And then right next to it, there's these signs around the store where they're trying to sell the fixtures, and so that's just an example of that sign and how they have it formatted. And then over here is the fleece, and there is still a lot of fleece in this store. It is 60% off, and it just keeps going. There's just aisles of fleece. It is getting picked over, so that's kind of nice. And then over here is all of this flannel, and it's 50% off. I believe that's a discount that's been holding for a few weeks, so nothing really exciting there. And then we have a Christmas aisle at 90% off, so that's nice, but then the Christmas bows are only 70% off. I really don't know what these guys are waiting for, because from what I was told, they have to close the store in a few weeks. This is an aisle where they had Christmas on the one side and then a bunch of this mushroom-related type stuff on this side. And so as you can see, only 40% off on that. Again, I don't know what they're waiting for. And then we have these 2-yard pre-cuts of flannel and solids for 60% off. That's kind of a decent deal. I might have to pick some up. Last chance in the flannels is 60% off. And then we have 60% off on this fashion fur, so that might be interesting. And 60% off on some of the other apparel. There's 60% off on the candles. And then this Christmas mat here, this was $3. So if you need a Christmas mat and you feel like storing it in your garage, there you go. The drinkware was 50% off right there. And then these diamond dots, they only had Sesame Street and it was only 30% off. Now, this was exciting. They actually have a lot of the Pellin interfacing and stabilizers back in stock. So it might be worth it for you to check that out. They finally got that out of the warehouse. And so now they actually have some stock of it, but it's only 30% off. And I remember oftentimes the typical sale that they did on that was anywhere from 40 to 50% off. So it's great that it's back in stock. You might want to wait. I don't know. And then we have more apparel fabric, and there's just different prices on it ranging from 30 to 60% depending on what it is. The tulle is 60% off. I think that is an increase in discount since the last time I was in. So that's kind of nice to see. And then finally, I see some movement with the denim and also the cotton and linen, so that would be the cotton gauze there. And so I'll have to go back in and do the shopping that I do to make it more than a 30% discount. The zippers are still 40% off. There's still a certain amount of zippers left, but they are getting depleted. There are more sewing machines that have come in from the warehouse from the looks of it, but only 15% off. Honestly, I don't know what these guys are waiting for. And then the outdoor fabrics were 30% off. The muslin finally increased to 30% off, and I was very excited about that and picked up some muslin. And then the thread is very depleted at this store. There is hardly any left there. There's some left there, kind of scattered, and then hardly any left on that side either. The remnants, they're finally getting a little bit more remnants in there, so that's kind of nice to see. And then the patterns are 50% off. Now, the interesting thing about the patterns was that when I was looking on Reddit, some people were saying that the pattern sale had been 60%, and then now it's only 50%. So I don't really know what the liquidation company is pulling, because there's still quite a lot of patterns here. I went ahead and bought my patterns earlier because I wanted to make sure that I didn't have to spend a bunch of time looking through catalogs. But there's a lot of patterns left. Here's the cutting aisle, only 30% off, so I really don't know what they're waiting for again. And then the pillow forms are only 40% off. That's been a discount that's been holding for a while. Batting is only 30% off. It is exciting to see that there is some batting back in stock. It hasn't been there for over a month, but 30% off, it just doesn't feel like they're serious about moving it. The ribbon is still only 40% off, but they have moved most of it. And then these notions over here are mostly 30% off. Again, I'm not so sure how serious they are about trying to move these sewing notions. And then the irons are 30% off, so that's nice. They didn't have the iron that I wanted, unfortunately, but there you go. And then, of course, not to be forgotten is the yarn. And so the yarn is kind of hit and miss. The first two aisles were pretty depleted, but this third aisle, they had this sign saying new merchandise arriving this week. And they do have a fair amount of yarn still left, and there's yarn that's kind of scattered in boxes around the store and aisles as well. And then over here is fabric paints and kind of, different shirts and stuff. The felt was 70% off. And then this wall was kind of where they had more of the paint and the fine art stuff. The jewelry aisle was very depleted. I mean, it was almost empty. And then paper crafting here, only 20% on these card stack bundles. I really don't understand that, but 60% off on the loose paper. And then over here in floral, the floral ranged from 40 to 70% off. 40 was more if it was a seasonal. And there's just a lot of it. They need to move this out. I really don't know what's going on with this. And we're coming to the clothes here. They do have some bags up by the front as well, but they're only 20% off, and that pretty much takes us out.